If you're a PvP player, you are not the target audience of this MMO. Yeah, like they're doing a lot of shortcut stuff to the game, and it's not great. It's all gonna be just ways to cut down the time spent on the game, and part of the fun of BDO is that it does take a long time, honestly. That's why I came back to the game when I stopped playing for about a year. I really missed the constant on feel of the game. I missed the arms race. I did miss those things. Like, a lot of people think that those things are a burden, but when I experienced, like, I played BDO I think for like 2.5 years straight, and then I stopped playing, and I was like, at first, like when I first turned it off, I was like, oh, I can shut my computer down and not feel bad about it. It was like a wave of relief, right? But that relief was quickly replaced by, like, I noticed the absence of something substantial to me, like, and that absence to me was not a good feeling. And I don't know any other game that made me feel this way other than BDO, and I actually really liked that. I did like the fact that the game felt like it was, I had to be on, I had to play. Like, I liked that pull. It's for some people, they look at that as obligation. For me, I look at that as motivation. That to me is a motivator. Yeah, I got you on that. They think they should add more motivating for level. Like, there really isn't very much motivation at this point. A lot of the content is capped, and I understand why they do it. They want to make the game more accessible to more people. But if you think about all the MMOs that are like hyper accessible to people, aside, like, I was talking about this to my guild the other day. Let's really talk about the model of these MMOs, right? Let's really discuss what the model is of BDO versus other MMOs. BDO as a model is based around an endless grind, constant content, endless grind. You're always going to have something to do or pursue or chase, right? The more shortcuts you add into the game, the less that content feels substantial, the less exciting the game becomes, the less, I guess, interesting the game is as a whole, because now you are cutting things out of the grind of the journey. The journey becomes shorter because the destination, there isn't a lot to it, right? The destination in this case isn't like Disney World where there's a million things to do at the end of the rainbow, right? It's more like the Grand Canyon, except if it was one spot. You get there, you look at it, you're kind of done, and then you move on. And that's why a lot of people end up stop playing. Once they get to the end of the destination, they're like, there's really nothing left for me to do. They log in and do basic maintenance stuff, and they log out. If you look at other MMOs, it's not like that. BDO is a sandbox, right? And the more sandbox elements that exist in the game, the more fun and exciting the game is. The more there is to explore, the more parts of the journey you have to engage with. And the PvP aspect of it is really important, because if you don't have PvP, then the world just feels safe. And a safe world is not a very exciting world. It's just, you know, what's the difference between BDO and Animal Crossing at that point? It's just Animal Crossing with swords, you know what I'm saying? Animal Crossing with the option to grind a little more. So other MMOs as a model are feeding you things as you go. They're feeding you elements to engage with. They're either feeding you content through dungeons, they're feeding you content through raids, and you're kind of on rails. Now, if we examine more closely World of Warcraft, right? World of Warcraft is very much on rails. And the thing about the rails on WoW is that as you get to the point where you are completing the endgame content, you're kind of done. You get to a point where you're now completing the maximum raids, and all you're doing at that point is just farming those max raids. Or if you're doing the rated PvP content, there's nothing left to do after you farm that stuff. You've gotten all your gear, and now you're just farming for raiding. Cool, that's fun for some people. But what I find extremely unfun and unrewarding is that every season, there's a reset that hits. So the season's over, now your gear on PvP is now invalidated because the new PvP gear is the top tier stuff. And even the lower tier stuff is better than the previous season's top tier gear. For some people that's fun, it's a good jump on point, but for a veteran player, that's really unrewarding, especially if you have that reset happen to you 3 or 4 times a year. That's a lot. Now let's look at the rating. The rating is the same way. You have top tier raids, and the top tier raids are great, but once the new raid comes out, it kind of invalidates the previous set. You only need the previous set to get into the latest endgame gear, endgame grind. Not that fun. As a business model, as a player that's been playing the game, let's say you've been playing the game for 10 years, every 3 to 6 months you experience a complete content reset. Is that exciting for you? Is that rewarding your time? Or does that just kind of crap on your investment? I feel like that's not very rewarding. I feel like that's just a on my investment. So excuse my language. I feel like that's It's just crapping on my investment. If I invested $200 in your game, I don't feel like I got 200 hours of my life back when you push out the new season and now my content's invalidated. Old school RuneScape does a good job of keeping your progress and not invalidating everything when a new raid comes out. And BDO does too. BDO does a good job of making you feel like you're progressing your gear, but without the end game threats being present, at that point you have to wonder, that's cool that I've got this gear, but what am I doing with it now? I'm not doing anything substantial with it now. It just exists. So let's look at a different MMO. Let's look at Final Fantasy 14 and let's look at Guild Wars 2. These two games are very similar. The strength of these games is 100% in their storytelling content. And if you're ever confused about that, you can just look at where they allocate their development cycle. Their developers, they have more developers put on story content and living world content for Guild Wars than any other location. World v World had like 3 developers in there. Their structured PvP had like 2 developers in there, and those guys are only able to do maintenance mode for those games or events. Whereas their story content had a whopping 19 developers in their story content. Compare that to the rest, that's a whole subsection of their game. The World PvP, the structured PvP is a whole subsection of their game in Guild Wars. And that's just how they allocated their funds. Or not their funds, but their personnel. So that really tells you where their dedication is aligned. Guild Wars 2 is never going to be a PvP-focused game because their focus in their development isn't in PvP. It's very stagnant. Their focus is always going to be around PvE first, and then they'll balance the PvP around the PvE. And Final Fantasy is very much the same way. But then let's fast forward and look at their endgame content. What do you have to do once you've completed all the stories? You unlock all the masteries, and then there's really nothing left for you to do in the game. You're just kind of done until the next expansion comes out. The lateral progression and non-horizontal progression is cool because let's say that you just started playing Guild Wars 2, and I've been playing it for 3 years. You and I can play together right away. I can engage in content with you, and it will lower my character's stats and abilities down to your level. Sure, I'll keep my bonuses, but generally speaking, it's going to lower me down to your level when we play together, which is very satisfying for you because now I'm not just power leveling through the content, but we're also able to engage in content. As soon as you hit max level, you can start playing with us on endgame content, because at the endgame, all you're doing now is farming for different sets and different stats. You're not farming for improvements because Ascendant gear, which is something that will drop out of most dungeons, is the exact same statistically as any other Ascendant gear. In fact, Legendary gear is also the same as Ascendant gear statistically. The only difference between the Legendary gear, which is extremely hard to craft, for me it took me months to get my sword, right? The only difference is I can change my stats on that weapon. If I want to change builds, I can change my stats. But also, isn't that the whole point, is to make the game accessible? That's why they have horizontal progression to begin with. So for me, it's kind of a counterintuitive system. It's a convenience, not a necessity. So Guild Wars 2, like I said, horizontal progression. It's great for you to have friends come in and join you, but once you finish the content, you're done with the game. There's nothing left to do other than fashion souls. Now let's fast forward and look at Final Fantasy 14. Very much the same. Final Fantasy 14's strength is absolutely in its story content. Their story is amazing. It's fun to watch. And if you're a Final Fantasy fan, and I grew up playing Final Fantasies, I loved the genre, I love the series. But ultimately, I don't want to invest 1,000 hours into a story that is only subpar compared to a single player story game. And then when I'm done with that journey, cool, I'll have all this cool stuff to show off to the players. And that's really the end game. It's just fashion souls. It's standing around town, showing off the stuff you've collected. And anyone who's ever played Final Fantasy, if I'm wrong, feel free to correct me right now. What do you do at the end game other than stand around town and show off all the cool gear you've collected? ERP and taverns, you know what? If you're into it, you're into it. But I would argue that you don't need gear or to play the actual MMO itself to ERP in the taverns. Outside of combat, do you think this game, do you enjoy the game most because of how difficult the progression can be? Like that, I do actually. I do like that it takes a long time. That's why I'm not satisfied when they give us content shortcuts. I don't like that because I like the fact that the game is hard. The gear is hard to get. That it requires enhancements and it requires progression and it requires cups, and I do like that. It keeps me perpetually on the chase for the next level of my power. And I think that's a good way to do it because my gear is no longer invalidated. It's just sometimes when they add the shortcuts, it makes it so that other players can catch up to my gear, right? And I'm fine with that. I'm fine with catch-ups. That's perfectly fine and dandy, without invalidating the progress that I've made in my own gear, if that makes sense. So for BDO, the changes they've made to make the game more PvE friendly, I feel like are cutting it under the legs because the PvE in this game is just not that great. And I don't mean like the combat is not that great. I mean like the game isn't really about the storyline. It has a storyline, but it's not people's favorite. It's not well presented. The PvE content, just being boss rushes and being grinding, is not that engaging. It's not as engaging as a story-based PvE. The dungeons, we have 3 dungeons. They get very repetitive, and there is no raid content. So at the end of the game, at the end of the day, the content, the end game content of BDO is literally what you make of it. And if what you make of it is just raiding or sieging or dungeons or whatever, the content is extremely repetitive. And without the unpredictability of world PvP, I feel like the game has really undercut its own legs because it had the cornerstone of this, right? It had the corner on the market of the PvP game, where people can PvP without extremely hefty consequences and still enjoy the game and have fun. That's kind of gone. It's going to take a long time for BDO to find a new identity, and it had an identity and took itself away. Is PvP content completely gone? No, it's not completely gone. But has it changed severely? Yes, it has. I don't feel like the solution that they enacted was a good solution. I feel like it was a stopgap, and I don't really know why they chose it. I don't think they're going to change it. This change came from Jay directly, like I said. We need Inception level change in Jay's mind. He probably did this change regardless of what everyone wanted. I guarantee you he was probably pushing it for months. Make no mistake, this change was, I think, bad. It was bad. Because realistically, the change was there to court new players into playing the game. We had an influx of new players, and Jay wanted to retain those players, and he thought that taking away GvGs would be the ticket to do it, because it can be very difficult. There were some players, I guess, in Korea that were abusing new players and making it impossible for them to enjoy and play the game. But my mindset is, if that is what the player base does, I'm a little sad that Korea didn't have a version of the hunters that were running around hunting those guys down, keeping them so freaking busy that they could not harass new players. Because that's realistically what we were doing. I mean, at the end of the day, we kept guilds that had gear so busy with fighting us that they didn't have time to go screw with the new players. Because when they did, we would just show up and mess with them. We would tell the new players to leave, and then we would screw with them until they left. So barring that, now I have just basically PvP content on Arsha, and it just feels a little empty. When I started playing in 2017, one of my favorite things was that you always had to be on your toes in case somebody came up and straight up started attacking you. Made the game fun. Now it's just a grind. Exactly, Warbs. And that's more or less what I've been saying, is that the game doesn't feel dangerous, and because it doesn't feel dangerous, it's not very exciting. A safe game just isn't a fun game. They already enacted a lot of things that made the game safe. Marnie's Realm, non-Arsha servers. There's a lot of ways to be safe in the game and engage, but to date, I have never used a Marnie Realm to grind, and I don't want to because it's not very fun for me not to see players running around. They basically made the game more solo-friendly than ever, and it's already a very solo-friendly game. Let me grind solo zones in an hour without getting my silver per hour. I think their concern with that is that they power level it. But what really should be happening, Braden, is that they should be enabling more group content PvE that is rewarding, because they don't have enough rewarding group content PvE. Like, what do we have? Olin's Valley. You can do Olin's Valley, you can do dungeons, and that's about it. Otherwise, you are severely hurting for silver an hour. You can't engage every cup area that you want, every blue, yellow, red shard in a group grind. Yeah, Upper Gyfin, which is like mid-tier. It's one spot. Dekiaturos, yeah, I mean, I do like 2 people grind spots. I just don't feel like even Dekiaturos doesn't seem that profitable. Although I will say grinding with friends is more fun. Like, if I could do this with a friend, I would do this with a friend. I wouldn't do it on my own. We need more spots for party? Yeah. If they're going to go in a PvE-friendly direction, why not? Why not make the new flame area a group grind? Sure, it has high gear requirements, but one player can carry the other. The Turo spot was a group grind. It was a 2-person grind. That was really cool. That was a really cool concept. I ended up grinding for my flame with a friend. I made new friends in grinding for the flame because I would be like, hey, who wants to flame grind? And then my guild would be offline or wouldn't be anyone online or awake or whatever. So I would just go into the party finder and find somebody new, and then all of a sudden I made a new friend. And that was the last time they did a group flame like that. And the next one they did was a solo grind spot, which was fine. You know, maybe they want to do something different. And then this last flame was an actual joke. You can actually vendor the flame embers for more than the actual flame itself sells for, which is truly silly. Yeah, you'll be grinding it anyway in a group grind, and I get that, but I don't think that's. I think that's you're making do with a system that's not ideal. And that's not your fault. That's BDO's fault. Being killed by a PvP bully, wish for a bully, then call the hunters. Yeah, that's exactly what we were doing, though, Psycho. When a new guild got picked on by a much more veteran guild or a much more gear guild, we would step in and we would help them out, especially if they asked for our help. All the offensive decks that I ever lobbed were exactly that. They were decks that I lobbed because somebody else asked me to, that was in need. I met hunters through being decked on someone that they were looking for. Yeah, that's also true. We made a lot of friends through mutual decks. You know, I met you, and then you know what's funny about that is you met the hunters that way, and then you ended up finding your significant other in the hunters, and then you end up joining them afterward. Your life drastically changed because somebody that war decked you. Isn't that wild to think about, that your life would be completely different outside of the war deck? I don't even know what guild it was at this point that war decked you, but because that guild decked on you, we became friends, you met a significant other, and your life has been different since. Hunters EU. You know what, man? Like I'm a little sad there wasn't another guild that was like us in the other regions. I feel like if this existed in Korea, we would still have GvGs. There would be still guilds willing to do what we do, because we weren't picking on noob guilds. You know, we were picking on guilds that deserved it. Even the weaker guilds that we were picking on were guilds that either decked us or decked on a guild that was weaker than them and was harassing them. And I was like, they'll be so busy with hunters that they won't have time to bother you. That's exactly what we did. They were so busy with us, they didn't have time to bother anyone else. It is just copium, though. There's no indication that a change is ever going to come. We have no reason to think that a change is going to come. It sucks, but this is our reality. Hunters make crazy impacts. I feel like we did. I feel like we had a huge impact on the game and the community in the game. I think a lot of the endgame siege guilds that hated us or irrationally hated us were because they were often on the receiving end of that sword. They were the ones we were screwing with the most because they were the guilds that had the highest propensity to screw around with a guild, like a crummy RP guild whose guy wandered in their rotation and was like socially dumb and couldn't figure out how to handle the situation, and then therefore a siege guild would just deck them into oblivion. I feel like we were the only guild that stood up for guilds like that, and as a result, those guilds hated our guts. So you had the end tier PvPers that would just hate our guts irrationally. And I mean an irrational level of hate. They'd be like, oh, that's hunters. They're a cult. They're this, they're that. And they would just make up their own reality to deal with the fact that we were just running around in the game and beating the pants off them. And they were supposed to be this end game siege guild. And my guild didn't even do node wars. So they couldn't hold the node war leverage against us. We were not going to bend the knee ever, under any condition, for any reason. And I think that really bothered them. That bothered a lot of those guilds that felt like they were entitled to some form of power because they could do sieges. You took up a lot of their time, and in the BDO economy, time is money. You cost their guilds silver per hour massively. I agree. I'm very aware. We are very much so. Every hour they spent GvGing us, we were enjoying the hell out of ourselves, and they were losing the money per hour because they needed to grind to keep on their competitive edge, which we were not required to. We weren't locked up in sieges for 4 hours a week. We weren't locked up in node wars for 2 hours every night or every other night. We were out there exposing a lot of these guilds for being the crap people that they were, honestly. Some of them just had bad people in it, and they were just, they were just getting put on blast in 4K. No guild wants to see their whole guild gets farmed by one warrior, after all. There were times where they were just, like, how many, for like a year or more, no, it was more. It was like for like a year and a half, we just spent that entire time getting zerged nonstop every day on stream. I didn't care. I had the most fun. That was so much fun for me. They felt like, oh, we're going to get that skull, man. I was like, please, you're not going to hurt. You're not going to bother me with a good time. It was fun to be participant in. It was fun to watch. It was objectively just hilarious content. Seeing 8 players chase down one warrior and then 2 of them outrun the other 6, and then I turn around and I clap them. That's just funny. Yeah, I'll miss those days. An era is over because it's never going to be like that again. Yeah, my guild is dead now because the recent guild changes, deck changes, no more alliance, no more node wars, everyone, or no more alliance, node wars, everyone bailed. Even the GM dipped. I'm a shy without no home or homies. That's sad. That's actually really sad. I know a lot of people stopped playing the game because of the changes. So I guess Jay wanted to court the new players, but what I'm about to say is completely honest and it's very sad. So if I hurt your feelings, understand that my feelings are hurt right alongside you, and it's very depressing. If you're a PvP player, you are not the target audience of this MMO. You're not the target audience of any MMO. PvP is a side content. It's side content, period. Because we are not profitable. What is profitable is the casual player who plays from who works 9 to 5, pops on and plays for 2 hours. That player is profitable. They don't care what's happening in the game. They don't care about the state of the game. They don't care about the protests that are occurring within the game community. They don't give a damn. They're just going to come on. They're going to play the game. Those are the most profitable players in the world in terms of the game sphere. So those of us that are more invested in the game, that care about the game, that care about how it progresses and what it feels like and if it's fun, we are not making the company money. And therefore, we are not the audience that is seeking to be retained here. And it's a sad reality. It's the enhancement system. It is. But at the end of the day, the enhancement system felt you had to rush it because of the arms race that was the game. And now that the arm race is gone, there is no arms race. It's like, what are you even getting the gear for? You're getting the gear, you're grinding mobs to get gear to grind more mobs. So cool, I guess. I don't know. I would never be grinding these mobs right now if I were not trying to get my telescope. Would it be hard to implement a new system for GvG that didn't solely rely on decks? Like we already have the guild recruitment tab divided into PvE. Why not give guilds the opportunity to enable PvP, enable option where they are PvP any other guild with PvP enabled for no karma loss? You know what they should do, Psycho? You know what would make sense? You can only flag and unflag in town, and in every server you flag on, when you're grinding while flagged, you have a 50% drop rate increase, and you can't enter money realms. That's what would make sense. And then it doesn't matter about the GvG system. Everything you do in the game is worth a little bit more money. Your energy regeneration is a little bit higher. Your silver per hour is a little bit higher. Just flagging gains you a benefit when you're running around the world not in a safe zone. That would be good content. And then everyone is opting in, and then you don't need Arsha. There's zero karma loss for killing players or flag.